sports betting has become this type of gambling, just like a slot machine. The issue with sports betting is, you're up against an adversary who knows as much as any sports bettor does. In fact, they've got the very best statistician setting the odds, and if the odds were set in such a way that you had a way of making money, then they would figure that out and they would change it. Maybe just seeing those gambling adverts that are meant to warn people about the need to gamble safely, maybe those will actually give people gambling urges.
Welcome back to the One Day at a Time podcast. Today, I have a very special guest. His name's Dr. Phillip Newall, and we're going to be talking about his research in sports betting advertising as well as casino-based advertising. Dr. Newall, how are you doing today?
Hi, Rob. I'm doing great. It's great to be here with you today.
Yeah, I appreciate you joining me. And for someone that is completely unfamiliar with your work, give us the elevator pitch. What is it that you do and why do you do it?
So I'm a gambling researcher through and through. I did my first gambling research study just over 10 years ago, which was looking at gambling advertising during the Soccer World Cup then. Doing gambling research has just been a really, really key part of my life since then. The reasons why I like gambling, I'm in a school of psychology, and for me, gambling, it's just a topic with such psychological depth to it. It's the only recognized behavioral addiction. So it's the only thing that doesn't involve the ingestion of any chemical, but which can create addiction that's been recognized. The second reason, which is, I guess, probably what you focus on a lot on your channel, is just all of the different harms that gambling can lead to. So, oftentimes, if a topic is sort of of a lot of academic interest, then it might not necessarily have practical importance. Whereas gambling has that through and through. Gambling, it devastates so many lives, both gamblers and people around them. And I think, especially in these times, we live in a very challenging world, very challenging times, and I think it's important that research should be attempting to address some of these challenges that we face as a society. And I guess the third reason is that gambling, if you compare it to other addictions, it's something that can utilize these advancements in technology. The technological side of our world is changing all the time, and the gambling industry is very adept at always using these new technologies to create newer, more immersive, more addictive and more harmful gambling products. And so that's something that I try and do in my research, to just keep abreast of all those developments, of all those new ways that the gambling industry is trying to hook people in.
The first thing that pops out to me is there's probably a lot of people listening that heard you, especially on that third point, talk about technological advances, and they say, well, every business is doing it, so why should we demonize this one industry for doing it? What's the difference between a gambling industry taking AI or some advanced technology to get you to gamble more versus Amazon getting you to shop more? Where's the line drawn between the two? Why is one okay and one not?
That really sort of gets into some of the gambling industry narratives. The gambling industry says that they are just a normal product like others and they should be regulated as such. That sort of regulation, basically the type of regulation that we've had in the UK, the gambling industry was deregulated along those lines in 2007. So just before the global financial crash. And, that sort of standard economic orthodoxy was, very strongly in the air at those times. Let's just have free markets. Let's let companies advertise their products to consumers. And as long as the consumers are fully informed and educated about the things that are being advertised, they can then make their best choice, right? They can see which of these products is it that best fulfills my needs in terms of a price quality trade-off. They'll go with the provider of that product, and the company that provides that better product will succeed, right? Because they'll get more business from customers. And that's just basically the sort of free market ethos way of regulating various industries, of which gambling can be regulated that way. And that's, of course, how the gambling industry wants to present themselves. It's just a normal business like any other. With gambling companies, when they're advertising their products to consumers, It's actually a very unusual situation here compared to other economic products that are being advertised. Well, a gambling transaction between a gambling company and a gambler is actually what's called a zero-sum game in economics. And essentially, what is happening is the gambling company, it's advertising some gamble or some product to a gambler, where what they're providing is the potential to win money, and the gambler is themselves trying to win money from the gambling operator. So it's a zero-sum game in that only one of these two parties can win. Either the gambling operator wins, or if the gambling operator loses, the gambler themselves wins. Now, the issue here is when we look at the sort of like underlying how that zero-sum game affects the gambling advertising transaction, right? So the issue is if gambling operators advertise bets that were actually really, really good, right? That actually offered high potential wins to the gambler that were actually true in that gamblers won these bets more often than not. Essentially, what would happen here is the gambling operators would just go out of business immediately, right? Because they're selling gambles that have got high potential wins, and these high potential wins are actually sort of like being advertised truthfully, and gamblers are just taking them and they're just winning money from the gambling operators.
So you could say then that the struggle really comes from within like the ethics of the advertising, the fact that if casinos and gambling operators want to succeed, they kind of have to get people doing highly risky bets, highly risky activities, the ones where they have the largest edge so that they get the biggest return on their investment. With that being said, like what are they doing in these commercials that is convincing people to actually come in and gamble? Because I would guess that the average everyday person knows the casinos always win. So why is it that people are still believing what they're seeing on these commercials?
This is essentially where the psychology comes in. Basically, if the bets and the offers that they are providing, they have to be bad deals by construction for them to be profitably advertised. But if they were obviously bad deals, then people just looking at them, they wouldn't find them enticing, right? They wouldn't think, oh, this is a great deal, I've got to go and get it. The only way that they can offer things that appear enticing but actually aren't, if they use some aspect of psychology. So if they use some sort of behavioral bias that is common in people more broadly, or also gamblers, that bias is something that can make the offer look a lot more attractive than it is. So one thing that they offer is free bets, right? So they'll give you a free bet if you sign up for an account and gamble with them. However, what they don't say quite so clearly is exactly all of the terms and conditions that they have on those free bets. So, if it was a truly free bet, then you'd just be able to put it on, you'd win some money and you'd be able to take it out. But actually, they've got a lot of fine print, they've got a lot of terms and conditions with those free bets. One of the most common ones is just what are called playthrough requirements. So when you put that bet on, and if you're lucky enough to even win some money with that free bet, then typically you'll need to continue betting for quite some time afterwards in order to be able to cash your money out. Oftentimes, these playthrough requirements are made so onerous that actually, like, by the time you've made all of those extra bets that you have to, you'll on average lost everything back that they've given you, and perhaps more. Another really thing that you have to be careful about with those free bets, if you are lucky and win with a free bet, then that's actually something that's quite a strong risk factor for experiencing harm later on. If you have a big win early on in your gambling history, then that's something that's been firmly established as being something that's been more likely for you to experience harm later on, because that early big win just sort of becomes imprinted in your mind in terms of, this is what happens when you gamble. When you gamble, you get a big win. So actually, when it comes to those free bets, actually it's kind of the unluckiest thing that can happen to you. is to actually win some money with one of those.
I can relate so much because you're basically describing my life for the last 6 years, which was like, find a gambling deposit match, and then there's like a 20x playthrough, so you have to wager the money 20 times before you can cash it out. Which God knows you're not cashing out any of that. And then going even further, like I don't know if it's like this in the UK, but in the US, with those free bets that the gambling operators are proposing and they're giving out, one, they want you to win because then you're going to come back and give it back to them eventually. But two, a lot of states in the United States actually allow the businesses to write that off as a marketing expense, as an advertising expense. And so they're basically saving money by giving it out. If you want to think about it that way, it's like free customer acquisition. Do they have that in the UK as well?
I'm not so sure about that on the business side. I guess that's I try and stick more to the psychological side.
Sure.
There are just so many sneaky tactics that they use, and because we've had online gambling for so much longer here, there are some small things that they've been regulated away and that they're not allowed to do anymore, but those tend to be quite piecemeal. One of the really sneaky things that they used to have here is something called reverse withdrawals. So say if you do happen to win some money and you want to withdraw it from your online account, then basically you'll click withdraw, and even though your deposit was handled instantly and was instantly shown up in your account, they'll actually put a delay of up to several days in processing your withdrawal. However, during that delay period, they used to have this big green button that just said reverse withdraw. And if you click that reverse witdraw at any time during that 3-day delay, then the funds would become instantly accessible to gamble in your account again. And so this was just a way that they made it very, very easy for you to continue gambling. And very, very hard for you to, try and regulate that by, withdrawing the money and stopping the money from being accessible to you anymore.
Yeah, I don't know if I told you this, but the last day that I ever gambled, I made some sports bets online in the morning, and then I felt like very, very guilty because I had just come off of an 8-month period of sobriety where I was like, all right, I want to get this money out right away, get back to a meeting, get myself clean. So I went to withdraw the money, and lo and behold, there's a 2-day withdrawal kind of delay. So my solution, which looking back was likely the dumbest thought I ever had, was, oh, well, I'll just go to the casino and talk to them and they'll give it to me in person, which they didn't do. So then I spent the next 12 hours on a gambling binge in that casino where I'd end up going into debt for 6 months. And so this reverse withdrawal is like very, very relevant to my experience. Not that I, blame them for my addiction or anything like that, but to not be able to get that money out right away did lead to me feeling an intense compulsion to go and gamble. So yeah, can definitely relate to that.
Exactly. I mean, obviously there's always, that aspect of individual behavior, which, gamblers tend to blame themselves for a lot. As a researcher, I also find, looking at the design features of gambling adverts and gambling platforms, there's a lot of ways that people are funneled in easily, and a lot of ways that it's made overly hard to get out.
What have you noticed about sports betting since, in the UK it's been a little bit longer, but since it moved online, have you noticed sports betting just functionally change as to the experience?
It's changed so much. In terms of gambling products, sports betting and slot machines historically are about as diametrically opposite as is possible. Sports betting and horse racing, they're kind of seen as being these slightly more thoughtful gambling formats that at least have some potential for skill involved, right? If you do think that you know a lot about the relevant domain, then maybe you can use that expertise in some way. Whereas gambling machines are seen as one of the more sort of like luck-based gambling formats. All you kind of do is press a button and there's some like inner workings of the machine and some result comes out. Another difference is in terms of the sort of rate of play. Like how much time elapses between putting one bet on, seeing the results, and then putting the next one on. With gambling machines, that speed of play is very fast, right? So one of the attractive elements of gambling machines is they don't have that sort of thoughtful consideration, but they have just the ability to go from one gamble to the next. So if one gamble doesn't work, then you've got that ease of opportunity of making the next one. Sports betting, historically at least, was a very slow gambling format, a little bit more like the lottery, where you put your bet on maybe at the start of the week. A lot of my, because I'm British, a lot of my research is about soccer and soccer betting, but it applies equally to American sports as well, because basically those sort of like sporting events are separated out in time. Historically, you put your bet on, you maybe like go down to the betting shop, the traditional way of putting on a sports bet here in the UK. You put it on before the soccer match started, and then you'd go away, you'd watch the soccer match. At the end of the soccer match, you'd see whether you won or lost. But then, crucially, you'd have very, very little opportunity to then, if you lost and were feeling frustrated about the loss, to put on the next bet. Sort of traditionally, soccer matches here in the UK will all occur on a Saturday afternoon. So, in the old model, is very, very slow because, you can only put a bet on once a week, a bit like the sort of frequency of lotteries. Whereas now, both because of the sort of like globalization of sport, and also how sporting schedules have moved throughout the week so that they can be shown on television and more people can watch them. But also because of technology, sports betting has become this type of gambling, just like a slot machine. The crucial development here is what's called in-play sports betting. So you're betting not on the final outcome of the sports, but you can also bet on sub-components of the sports event. So if you take, say, soccer, you can bet on who's going to be the person to score the first goal or score the next goal. As soon as a goal goes in, you can then you'll then see has that bet been successful or not. If it hasn't, then you've got that opportunity to immediately chase your losses and put another bet on. Now, you as Americans, you might like a thing that you often hear from Americans is that soccer is a very boring sport because hardly any goals are scored. So this example might feel a bit more salient to you if you take basketball as another game that now you can do in-play basketball bets as well. So in basketball, there's a hoop being scored all the time almost. And you can always be betting on who's going to score the next one. And crucially here, having the opportunity to do in-play sports betting on your mobile phone, you've got this opportunity to, while the sporting event is going on, just keep pressing that button, keep putting more and more bets on, and it's got that potential to create that sort of zoned in state that you can have with an electronic gambling machine, where you're so focused on that sort of like continual process of putting a bet on, seeing if you won or lost, and then just going straight on to the next one without having any reflection. Whereas with sports betting back in the day, you got that outcome only after watching a 90 minutes long soccer match, and you had a whole week to think about what were the bets that you're going to put on the next week.
Even within that, like one thing that I noticed was when I was doing my gambling for the live betting, if you gambled on certain websites, right, the live bet, so say it was who's going to score the first goal in a soccer match. The guy scores the goal and you won. Well, on certain websites, you would get that payout when the game finished. On other websites, you get that payout as soon as the goal is confirmed by VAR, right? So if that's the case, you can then bet who's going to score the next goal. But if it takes till the end of the game, it kind of takes on that more traditional sports betting of I have to wait the 90 minutes to find out, to get my payout. It's almost fair to say that in-play sports betting with immediate payouts is the exact same thing as an immediate payout on a slot machine?
Yeah, it's incredibly similar, and that's something that we see in the literature, that basically the faster paced a gambling format is, the stronger the association with harm it has. So in-play sports betting is much stronger associated with gambling harm than just betting, once a sporting event. That's also one of the reasons why electronic gambling machines are so harmful, is because they were one of the first gambling formats that just made that easy ability to just keep clicking, keep doing the same thing over and over again in a very short loop. It's something that's used by many, many different gambling products. So here in the UK, we've got online slots are very, very popular as well. But yeah, it's certainly a unique danger of in-play sports betting. One other thing with sports betting in general is just the term that it's got in the literature is illusion of control. A common illusion that thinking that things that you know a lot about, or things where you have a personal choice between different options, it's a commonly held illusion that thinking that that personal control will increase your chances of winning at gambling. And one of the really dangerous features of sports betting is just, firstly, sports is something that a lot of people have, a lot of identity wrapped up around about. Sports fans, they're watching their team all the time. When a game isn't on, they're reading the news, they're maybe listening to podcasts, they're taking in all of this information. And it's a very commonly held bias, that thinking that just knowing that information, and having those choices between different options increases your chance of winning. In sports betting, it really very, very rarely does. The issue with sports betting is, you're up against an adversary who knows as much as any sports bettor does. In fact, they've got the very best statisticians, mathematicians setting the odds. And if the odds were set in such a way that, like, you had a way of making money, then they would figure that out and they would change it. So having all of these different options, which you have in in-play sports betting, right? You can bet on essentially any different outcome in the match. Like in soccer, you can bet on when the next corner will be, who'll get the next yellow card, what goals will be scored. You can also combine all of these different features together in bets that have longer odds, like higher potential wins. And essentially, none of it will ever help you really make money. It can help sort of like provide that illusion. It's sort of like, it's something that can also give that sort of like continuing, lingering hope when you're gambling and losing, right? Because, if you've been betting on a certain player to score the next goal and he just never does, well, you can sort of like explain that away by going like, oh God, well, like I don't know what's gone wrong with my player now, but I've got all of these other things that I can gamble on.
Yeah.
And having all of these gambling opportunities just readily available to you, that's something that's a very dangerous aspect of this product design.
To someone that doesn't really gamble too much, a good comparison might be social media, how it's an endless scroll. Well, when you look at sports betting now, there's endless options for you to make that next bet. If you're not liking what you're doing anymore, oh, that's fine. Just make another one and another one after that. And I like what you said about, sports being wrapped up in identity, because I feel like that can lead to a lot of people making bets that they otherwise wouldn't have made. So say, for example, they're watching a game with their friends of their local team. Well, now if one person gambles, everyone might start gambling on the game, because it gives you that sense of fan identity, that stake in the game, right? And it
Mm,
becomes something that can
mm.
get probably very easily manipulated by the marketing. In your research, have you found that there's like certain types of adverts that are more dangerous or more impactful than others? And I'm thinking maybe sports are kind of towards the top of that.
With research, it's always a little bit of a black box in terms of being able to see what the adverts are actually doing. You know, basically the gambling companies are the ones who've got all of that data, especially online. They're able to observe through their analytics what effect different advertising strategies have and sort of tailor them, perhaps personalize them. To us as researchers, we're sort of like, you know, we're sort of like stumbling around in the dark trying to piece things together. My sort of guiding light as a researcher is that the things that the gambling industry does the most frequently are the most likely to be exploiting some aspect of psychology that's commonly held and that's able to get them to entice people onto putting on these bets that are profitable for the operators, primarily the bets that appear to be better than they truly are. One thing that we have seen a lot in soccer here are these sort of combination bets. So you can call them, say, a parlay is a commonly used word. So this is a bet where you're not betting on just a single thing, such as a team to win a match, but your bet requires multiple things to happen in order for the bet to pay off. And these can be really quite alluring for quite a few reasons. The first is because you're betting on several events to happen, the bets are advertised with quite a large potential payoff compared to the amount that's wagered, right? So if you're wagering just $1, then these bets can maybe pay $20 profit, say, if everything in the parlay happens correctly. One thing that gamblers are enticed by are these large potential payoffs compared to the amount wagered, right? Because, you know, say if you've been losing money, or even if you haven't, it's really quite attractive to think like just with this one little dollar bet, say I can just turn things around and suddenly be in profit again. So they have this combination of multiple different things. This combination of things can be events from different sporting events. So traditionally it would be in soccer, say like one team to beat another, and then a wholly separate match, another team to beat who they're playing, and so on. And you can combine these maybe 7 or 8 different matches. One thing that they've done to have these bets within in-play sports betting, so within a single event that you're watching, is to make them happen on multiple events in the same match. So you could have, say, a bet on a certain player to score the next goal, another player to get a yellow card, and maybe there to be like a specific number of corners or free kicks in a given interval of time. So these bets have got large potential wins compared to the amount wagered, which is alluring. And then another trick that they use is they make these sort of like individual events ones that are sort of like very easy for casual fans to imagine happening. So the individual events are really quite salient, and they're things that a sporting fan can imagine happening. So they tend to have things in soccer such as very good goal scorers to score goals, very good teams to win. It's basically offering what seems to be the perfect combination of long odds, but yet something that feels like it's likely to happen. However, the trick here is when you're dealing with probabilities, like multiple events that all have to happen for the bet to pay off, you know, the probabilities actually start to become small really, really quickly. It's not very intuitive that the probability of a combination of events, even if those individual events appear quite likely, if you've got enough events in the combination, actually becomes incredibly unlikely. So actually these bets, even though they're offering high potential wins that look really good, if you're a scientist such as myself and you actually add up the numbers and try and do the math, then you'll actually find that the bookmaker's profit margin is actually way higher on these bets compared to the conventional bets where you're just betting on a single team to win or something like that. The last trick that they use is something that's very common from slot machines, which is called the near miss effect, right? So it's a very classic thing in slot machines. If you come very close to a win, say you get all but one symbol aligning, and that one last symbol is just right next to where it's just one reel up from where it has to be for you to win. This is what's called a near miss or a near win. And near misses have been shown to be actually almost as alluring as actual wins when it comes to promoting people to put the next bet on. And slot machines have actually been designed nowadays to have more near misses in than they would otherwise have by chance. But you have these near misses actually coming in with these combination sports bets by construction, because very often what happens if you're betting on a combination of say 3, 4, or 5 events that all appear individually plausible, so you can easily have 2, 3, or 4 events happening. We're missing one last event for the bet to pay off. So the sort of like intuitive gambler's mindset is like, oh God, if only that last thing had happened, like I would have won these huge winnings compared to what I put on. But it's actually a trick of the imagination. Like a near miss isn't any better at all than a gamble that completely lost.
Yeah, almost doesn't count. But
yeah,
when you say that, it even you can get a little bit deeper into the near miss when you think about how quality of the statisticians that they have are. When you look at basketball, for example, like a player's over under, how many times do we look at that? And the difference, say if a player was supposed to score 20.5 points, they score 21 or they score 20. Like they're right on the mark, which adds to that near miss effect. It's not only did I lose my parlay by one leg, it's that I lost by 1 point or one like second. Like it can get so small, the difference between a win and a loss, that you can conflate that with bad, like, oh, it's just bad luck. Like I knew he was going to score those points. It's just he missed one.
Yeah, if only he hadn't missed that shot, or if only, like, you know, the other team hadn't made a substitution. Like, there are so many ways you can sort of replay it after the fact and sort of like, you know, just one little thing, just replace it in and, you know, to make the gamble be a winning one in your mind.
When we think about this pace of play and the fact that you can get really immersed in sports betting, it sounds very similar to what Dr. Natasha Schull described as the machine zone when it comes to slot machines. Do you feel like we're experiencing now the birth of the machine zone within sports betting, meaning the sports bet is the only thing I see, everything else fades away?
Absolutely. You know, there are quite a few anecdotal reports that you hear about, you know, like maybe someone who's even bought a ticket to the stadium to like go see a sports event in person, but then they're not even looking at the event at all. They're just completely immersed in the phone and the sports betting app. Another risk factor that you have in sports betting is obviously, like we talked about, you know, the whole sort of identity thing of like having a team that's core to your identity that you follow and that you bet on, because, you know, that's one way of showing your identity. And that's how an addiction to sports betting begins for a lot of people. But also because the sports are happening, you know, somewhere around the world, there's always a sporting event happening. And these are all available on the app. Quite a strong sign of, you know, someone experiencing substantial harms from sports betting is the tendency for them to bet on sports that maybe they're not even watching the event, or it's not a sporting code or a league that they follow at all, right? So it could be the case that soccer fan, someone was betting on the English Premier League matches on the weekend, though all of those matches finish, but they've still got that urge to continue sports betting. Well, maybe they're going to start betting on third division Brazilian soccer, or you know, Australian netball, or just, you know, pick your choice, really. Like there's lots of examples of people just getting into sports betting, you know, maybe with a sport or a team that they know absolutely nothing about. They're not even watching it. They've just got, you know, that alluring app in front of them, and it's allowing them to continue pressing buttons, and they're just pressing buttons and hoping to get that reward out of the app. it's very, very similar in terms of those core product design ways that the sports betting has evolved to become like electronic gambling machines.
If I'm an 18-year-old who's going into their first semester at university and I see all my friends convinced that they're going to make money gambling, why should I not view sports betting as an investment?
The key thing is just think about who you're gambling against, right? You're gambling against probably a multinational corporation that's designed these products, uses all of these tricks to make it look very attractive, and to maybe create that potential, that offer that just with a very small bet maybe you could win a lot of money. That hope and that need that people have to try and turn the financial system around. It's something that the gambling companies use very well, and it's actually one of the most tragic things with gambling. Experiencing gambling harm, it's related to social deprivation. So it's the people who are actually the least well off in our society, who are most drawn in by that offer from the gambling industry, that they could maybe turn their lives around with a gamble, that they could win money, they could win it maybe very easily. But actually, people who are experiencing those deprived situations, almost uniformly, this decision to gamble, it actually makes their situations even worse. So I've done some research looking at support forum posts. So these are posts that people made online describing gambling and the way that it's harmed them. And one of the most tragic things that we saw actually is the desperation that happens when people have gone far into this cycle, right? So when your gambling losses become so high, that way of sort of like trying to get out by just, based on the money that you earn at your job, say, when it becomes very hard to imagine getting back to even by not gambling, that's actually the most tragic circumstance, because we see posts where people are like, gambling has got me into this situation, it's got me these huge losses, but actually I don't see a clear other way out. And so despite all of that past experience, it almost feels like gambling is my only hope, my only way of getting back. And that is just the most tragic and desperate thing. And yeah, it's obviously, it's very hard to warn people about risks that they haven't personally faced yet. Psychologically, it's very hard to learn from other people's experiences. We tend to learn from our own experiences and the rewards that we do or don't get from our own behavior. But yeah, I would say to that student, just try and educate yourself as much as you can, and just see, do the people who engage in a lot of gambling, does that seem to get them where they want to go in life? Yeah, almost always it doesn't.
Yeah, that's a big portion of my messaging here on my platform, is that, I did that exact process myself. I got to the point where I thought, well, I'll never make enough money working the job that I'm doing, so I need to get a big win to get out of it, which just led to worse problems down the road. But I try
Yeah.
to help people not have to go as far down that path as I did. That's my hope. No one's going to be winning money and think this is awful, I should quit. But once you start to experience those pockets of negativity, if you're able to kind of grasp their real meaning instead of just ignoring them and saying it was bad luck, that could save you years of struggle.
My research in general, it tends to use oftentimes some aspects of online data collection. So we have ways of doing online experiments with gamblers. We also sometimes process and analyze large data sets that are naturally occurring online. So for example, that research that I described, looking at support forum data, that's just data that we got online and processed. I've also done some research using sort of like naturally occurring data. So for example, research looking at people's electronic gambling activity as seen in their bank statements. I've also done a lot of research on gambling advertising. And some recent research that I've done is looking at the effects of different gambling adverts that we have in the UK. Gambling advertising, it's, I suppose, relatively new in the US. We've had it for so long in the UK now that, nobody can really sort of like remember back to the days that we weren't completely saturated in gambling advertising. We've had it since 2007. Myself personally, the first time I can really strongly remember seeing gambling advertising on TV was in 2011 during, while watching soccer matches on TV. One of the issues with gambling is that if people aren't personally affected by it or don't personally see it in some way, then they're not gonna sort of like take action or take note. One reason why gambling advertising is an area that has led to some policymakers in the UK taking notice is just because gambling advertising, because it's just so widespread, it's something that pretty much everyone is exposed to in some way, because you just turn on the television, you get on your mobile phone and you just see an advert. There's a lot of gambling advertising that I see on YouTube, for example. We've had so much gambling advertising now that basically any time that it looks like politicians are going to do something to restrict gambling advertising, then the gambling industry comes in with some sort of like self-regulatory measure, and they say, don't worry, you don't have to regulate us. You don't have to regulate gambling advertising because we're going to regulate it ourselves. The first thing that really happened in gambling advertising in terms of self-regulation in this way, so they started putting messages on at the bottom of the adverts, say at the end of the adverts, and it'd be some sort of tokenistic warning message, like saying, gamble responsibly would, I guess, be the classic one, the one that's used most often. I've done research into these messages, the ones that the gambling industry comes up with here in the UK, and I've shown that they either have absolutely no effect at all, or they may even lead to people gambling slightly more than if they said nothing at all. That's primarily the case with one of the messages that they came out with, where the slogan was "When the fun stops, stop," and the word "fun" was always sort of like put in very large font there. And sometimes that message was just flashed just for a very short time at the end of an advert, and basically it's almost like you're just having the word "fun" flashed at you.
Wow.
But the latest thing that the gambling industry has come out with here is what's called safer gambling adverts. So these are branded 30-second commercials, right, which have the gambling operator's logo on it and everything, but which is just telling it's not promoting a free bet, it's not promoting a new way of betting, it's just promoting what are called safer gambling tools. So these are things that gamblers can use to sort of, maybe limit the amount of money that they can deposit online. However, the gambling advert, it's got all of those logos, it's got all of that branding. And one thing that we looked at in our research was, because it's got all of that branding, maybe because it's these cues that are so strongly associated with gambling, maybe just seeing those gambling adverts that are meant to, warn people about the need to gamble safely, maybe those will actually give people gambling urges. And that's something that we looked at in our recent research. One of our key findings there is that seeing one of these safer gambling adverts with all the operators' branding, that's actually something that still gives people urges to gamble.
That's incredible. So what you're saying is basically this industry is doing this thing to say, hey, we're trying to do our best over here to make sure no one gets hurt. But the very thing that they're doing is making more people continue to get hurt. So it's like, if, let's say, with air quotes, their intention is to get everyone to gamble as much as possible, them saying, hey, gamble less, actually helps them to accomplish that goal. That's insane.
That's the inherent strategic devious logic, I suppose. Essentially, what they want is they want to do something that'll, like, tick that box when it comes to their the lobbying that they're going to do to politicians. But they also really don't want that thing to be effective, because if it was truly effective self-regulation, it would lead to less gambling and less profits for them. So the sort of perfect situation for them is something that is either ineffective or that may itself in some way continue contributing to harm.
In your research, how did you figure out that these commercials were making people gamble more? Did you have like a comparison, like a control group that you kind of used?
The sort of outcome measure here is a commonly used scale on gambling urges. So people who are experiencing harm from gambling, they have these sort of urges to gamble, which, especially if there are a lot of easily available gambling opportunities around them, can then translate into them gambling more. When we do research, of course, we want to do research that is as ethically sound as possible. So all we looked at there is the effect of the gambling adverts, which people are exposed to here in their normal lives all the time. And we showed a statistically significant increase in their gambling urges after seeing a gambling advert. Obviously, the inference is slightly indirect here in terms of actual gambling behavior. That's another thing that the gambling industry is very adept at using in its conversation with policymakers. An issue with research is that research is all limited inherently in some way. There's no such thing as a perfect research study. Any research study has got limitations. We're always just doing the best that we can. And the gambling industry is very, very adept at using these sort of these hedges that we have in terms of our scientific understanding, and sort of miscommunicating that and saying that there's far more doubt than there actually is. So it's something that the gambling industry has used to avoid any strict government regulation when it comes to gambling advertising, is they say there's no causal evidence that gambling advertising leads to harm. But actually, the issue here is that, a research study that's producing causal evidence would actually be completely unethical to perform, right? So with causal evidence, what you're talking about here is an experiment. You have a control group that doesn't experience the stimulus, and then a treatment group that does, right? And so we need to have one group of people that sees gambling advertising and one group that doesn't. The issue that you have in the UK is that everyone is seeing gambling advertising. So the only way you could do a causal test to see if gambling advertising causes harm, so you'd have to, in some way, abduct like a huge number of babies at birth, keep them separated from the rest of society, show one half of them gambling adverts and show the other half no gambling adverts, and see if this led to the group that saw gambling adverts, see if they started to gamble more than the control group here. Of course, this experiment could just never be done. It's completely unethical. So that's why we don't have strong causal evidence about gambling advertising causing harm. However, all of the research studies that can be done show that being exposed to gambling advertising is strongly associated with experiencing harm. But just as scientists, that word cause is a very specific one.
You would think that you would default to the best option that you have as the truth, but I guess not. So that's just how it goes, I guess. But one thing that we had talked about before we got on the call today was what you observed during the research study of a wood preservative commercial versus responsible gambling messaging. Could you tell me what that was about?
Yeah, so we did also have other groups in this experiment. So in the experiment, they just watched a 30-second commercial that's commonly shown on British TV, and then we observed the change in the gambling urges after seeing the commercial. So they completed the gambling urge scale just before the commercial, and then right after as well. As I was just explaining, in any sort of causal, in any experimental research, you need some sort of control group that aren't exposed to the same stimulus that you're comparing against. And so we had to have in this group, in this study, a group of participants who didn't see any sort of gambling advert at all. Essentially, just advertising in the UK tends to be quite boring. Just thinking back to my own upbringing in the 90s and 2000s, things aren't quite as glamorous as you have things in the United States. So we have quite a lot of boring TV with quite a lot of nondescript middle-aged men just saying quite boring things, just matter-of-factly. And it's a very long-running advertising campaign that essentially every British person will know. It's for a product called Ronseal, and the whole advert is just basically a middle-aged man saying, Ronseal does exactly what it says on the tin. And this is something that is marketed to middle-aged men who want their garden fences to stay nicer for longer, and they just put some Ronseal on. And so in the control condition, participants saw an advert like this. The other adverts that we used was one for instant coffee, and then also an advert for oak furniture. And that was the only condition in the experiment where there was actually a statistically significant reduction in participants' gambling urges between the two times that we measured. When it comes to the sort of like gambling adverts shown on TV, there was actually a campaign run by an independent charity that was successful in reducing gambling urges as well. But essentially, the long and the short of it is, if a gambler wanted to reduce their urges with gambling, they shouldn't pay attention to any of the safer gambling material that gambling operators have, but they'd be much better off just switching to some random British TV station and just seeing what sort of boring and unsexy products are being advertised there.
I guess you probably dive deeper and ask, is it happening because the gambling commercials are actually interesting versus the other commercials? But either way, it's just showing, like, even when they're trying to do the right thing, it's getting more people to gamble with the RG messaging. We see gambling advertising everywhere, and it's like a commonly joked about thing here now. Like, if you're scrolling on your phone, like, you're going to find a gambling ad after the third scroll. Like, it's just everywhere. It's pervasive, it's continuous, high volume. And it seems to be that the more ads there are, the more profit is made by the gambling operators. When I think as a content creator about advertising, if I was to go and make this a sponsored video and right now throw an advertisement in, the audience would get taxed. They would feel like I was continuously trying to sell them something. And at a certain point, they'd stop listening to me. Why is it that the gambling companies can make thousands and thousands of ads and people will joke about it, but they don't seem to tire from it or like refuse to use the product? Why is there not like a maximum number of ads for these companies before people get angry with them?
Firstly, they use a lot of different adverts, right? Like, they tend to sort of switch things around. They do then use a lot of common tropes beyond that. They oftentimes use, or at least try and use, things like humor, right, to like sort of create this association that gambling is a fun activity. They also tend to show lots of people together, right? Like, they show gambling as a very social activity, whereas, that's how gambling often starts, but it's not how gambling ends for people who experience a lot of harm from it. And they also use, a lot of tropes around masculinity, male camaraderie, things that I think are, I guess, meant to appeal to that target market of young men, being, a group of people that experience higher rates of gambling-related harm than other groups. I mean, there's definitely always a lot of different gambling operators that are showing adverts. So it's not just a single gambling operator and their branding that you see, but you see lots of different ones. Yeah, I mean, there does usually come a point where it becomes so heavy that maybe some powers that be take notice and decide that they want to take action. Here in the UK, that happened at the 2018 Soccer World Cup. Across the whole World Cup, it was maybe like, say, 1 in every 4 adverts was a gambling advert. I think definitely if you stitched all of the gambling adverts together, I think that would have made like a complete soccer match in itself.
Jeez.
But that's when, you started to get more stories in the news about people who've experienced harm from their gambling. And in general, when enough people have experienced harm from gambling, some fraction of them will be able to get their stories out in the news, become heard by either members of the public or policymakers. And that is something that can eventually lead to enough pushback that the gambling companies feel that they have to do something. So we do see less gambling advertising on TV now. Of course, what's happened nowadays is that most gambling advertising is online. So I think in the UK, I think 4 times as much is spent on online marketing than TV marketing now. And obviously, online marketing is personalized much more. So if you're not, only certain segments of the population are going to be seeing the majority of the gambling adverts shown online. And so that's one trick that they use to sort of reduce that sort of widespread public awareness, because I guess there's just less debate about the things that we each see on our phones compared to the things that we collectively see on the TV screen.
Yeah, that's totally fair, because especially if you're on maybe websites or platforms that you don't want to talk about being on with other people and you're seeing these advertisements, you're probably not going to bring it up because you're not going to even if it's something as like simple as being on TikTok too much. You're not going to say, "Oh, I was on TikTok for 3 hours and that's why I saw 15 gambling ads." You're going to say, "Oh yeah, sometimes I'll see them on TikTok or whatever." So it gets a little bit less quantifiable in terms of keeping track of it, or maybe even just people feeling ashamed of sharing their actual activities. If I am someone that is maybe on that borderline of struggling with gambling, maybe I'm doing okay, I still see it as kind of a casual thing to do with friends, what would you say to me on what should I be aware of when seeing these advertisements? What kind of mindset should I have to kind of keep things in perspective?
We've done some research on, trying to produce our own educational videos to explain the persuasive aspects of gambling advertising to people. For example, presenting gambling as a fun activity, right, is something that they say very commonly. That's definitely one way that it can start, but it's not how it tends to end if you get too far into it. The same with the way that they show lots of people gambling together. Again, that's, as we said, something that a way a lot of people start gambling. If you end up gambling heavily and experiencing harm from it, that's not how it's going to end. I think you should also think a lot about who exactly is it that is doing the advert and why are they paying the price to whatever platform it is that they're advertising. Why are they doing that and what are they standing to benefit? So one of the forms of gambling advertising that you see a lot online is affiliate marketing. So an affiliate is not a gambling operator, but it's someone who's paid by the gambling operators to get more people to sign up. So affiliates, one of the things that they commonly do is they try and sell themselves as tipsters, right? So in sports, they'll say, hey, we know what all the good bets are, and they oftentimes show very prominently bets that they have suggested in the past that happen to succeed. But actually, the way that most affiliates and tipster affiliate accounts are monetized is They're monetized by getting a proportion of all of the losses of the accounts that they are able to sign up for the operator. So their clear financial interest is to get people to sign up to gamble and then to lose, because the more that people who sign up through them lose, the more money they make. So really, yeah, don't just look at the advert and look at the messaging, but try and think about what are the intentions behind the person that put all of this expense together to make this very slick and immersive and appealing advert, and just think, what is their core motivation? Their core motivation is to make money from gambling. Who do they make money from? Gamblers. They make money from gamblers that lose. They don't make money from gamblers that succeed. One of the things that the sports betting companies do in the UK is any sports bettor who does actually win consistently, they get their accounts closed down. And the people who lose money, their accounts don't get closed down. In fact, they just get sent more and more promotions, more and more free bets, more inducements to keep gambling. In gambling, the gambling operator, the house always wins. So you really have to think about that. In this commercialized world, gambling is sold to make money, and it makes money for other people, not for gamblers.
How do we solve it? How can we change the way that advertising is put out there, how it's consumed, to reduce the amount of harm that it's going to do? Because let's take for a given that gambling is going to be around from now on. How do we fix the damage that the mass advertising is doing?
Trying to inform policies to help prevent gambling harm. That's very much what I got into as a researcher. One of the difficulties is that it's very hard to regulate an industry that's making so much money for the people who own it, and they also pay taxes to the government, and the government makes money through that. The same thing's been observed with tobacco. Like, we've known about the harms of tobacco for a very long time, but it's very hard to do things like get rid of tobacco advertising and to regulate tobacco products in ways that make the products less appealing. Things like warning messages, things like plain packaging. When I first got into gambling research 10 years ago, I guess I underestimated just how difficult it would be to get things, help change things for the better, help make gambling less harmful. It's really hard no matter which way you look. Like, it's in terms of like smaller interventions, like things like the messages at the end of gambling adverts. That's one thing that we might do in the near future in the UK. We might switch to short messages that are devised independently. So not messages that are done by the industry. That's, one sort of small scale thing. One larger scale thing would be, proposing that there should be a total blanket ban on gambling marketing, similar to what we've aimed towards with tobacco, in which some jurisdictions are doing better than others. Obviously, with that kind of big policy change, that's when the policymakers sort of demand the highest, most stringent levels of evidence, and that's when it becomes harder as researchers, because obviously stronger forms of evidence are harder or maybe impossible to generate. So it's really, really difficult. The one thing that I would say that has led to some change here in the UK is just more widespread understanding among people more broadly about the harms of gambling. So I think that's one thing that you do really well on your channel. You talk about gambling in a way that people can understand, and you talk about both your own experiences, but then you also deconstruct, say things from the academic literature in a really accessible way. We really just need more widespread understanding. One of the issues with doing research in academic journals it's just so few people read those that, even if you have just the perfect message that's the most finely constructed, it's likely that so few people are going to read that it's unlikely to build up any sort of momentum. So what we really need is more educators, more campaigners, more advocates such as yourself. That's the one thing that really has led to some change here in the UK. We've got a lot of very impactful charities, a lot of people who've been impacted by gambling harm, and they're very good at getting their message out in the media. And as an ivory tower academic, all I hope to do is to just be able to communicate some of these findings, some of these messages a little bit more broadly sometime. I guess that I keep my hope alive that at least in this part of the world, maybe we'll be able to get some positive change sometime.
To everyone that's watching, if you want to see a real example of someone that's been harmed by gambling, then watch this video and let's keep getting better together one day at a time.